This video goes over general information about the Physics 1101-1120 labs, and also discusses how you fill in a lab notebook. This is information that would usually be gone over in the first lab period, so if you're watching this, it may be because you missed the first lab for some reason. Keep in mind that the information in this video will be specific to me, Jennifer de Benedictis. A different lab instructor might have different instructions for you. So let's begin. I'm Jennifer. You can call me Jen, Jennifer, Miss de Benedictis. It's really not an issue to me. Email is the best way to get in touch with me. I have given you my office phone number for Surrey campus here, but I'm not on Surrey campus every day of the week, so email is a better way to get in touch with me. The way that the labs start is that we do 3 weeks of introductory work, which means that you would learn some lab skills that you're going to need, and then you begin to apply them by doing an experiment. So in the first week, you learn about uncertainties and how to fill in a notebook, and then you begin the acceleration on an incline experiment. In the second week, you learn about how to do calculations in Excel and how to write a typed report, and then you finish the acceleration on an incline experiment. In the third week, you learn about graphing, and then you apply those skills in the Hooke's Law experiment. For every lab this semester, you're going to need to watch a video before you come to the lab period in order to prepare for that week's experiment. For the intro weeks, however, you'll need to watch 2 videos, and there will be a little bit of homework. Things that you should bring to every lab include a lab manual, and by the way, there is a free electronic version that you can obtain from the physics department, or you can purchase a paper copy from the bookstore. Other things you'll need will include a lab notebook, a pen, and a USB flash drive is very useful because you will be doing a lot of computer work in the labs. You won't need it for the first lab period, but by the second lab period you should have one. A scientific calculator is also useful, although we will be doing a lot of calculations in Excel. And a small ruler just for drawing tables in your lab book is also useful, but that's optional. Next, I'm going to go over some lab policies and general information. You'll find this information on page 3 of your lab manual. The lab schedule is posted on the lab room door, and the labs do not run in numerical order, so you should check every week to make sure that you're preparing for the correct experiment. However, I have created a Moodle website that houses all of the introductory videos, and that is organized in the correct order, so you should be able to just click the next section down each week to prepare for the next week's experiment. The labs are worth 25% of your course grade, and there is a lab exam that happens mid-semester. Check the lab schedule to see when it will be. Labs will be due at noon the day after the lab period. In other words, if you have a Wednesday lab, your lab will be due at noon on Thursdays. If you've got a Thursday lab, it's due at noon on Fridays. I'm going to be having you hand in your labs electronically, however, so you don't need to come to campus to hand it in. You'll be able to hand it in online. If you've taken this course before and you got 70% or higher in the labs, then you may qualify for what's called a lab exemption, which would mean that you wouldn't need to redo the labs. We could just give you the grade that you got last time. However, that's something you have to set up with me in person, so if you think you qualify for a lab exemption, come and talk to me about it, and I'll see whether you satisfy the requirements. Scrolling down now. In the labs, generally speaking, you will be working with a partner. For the first 2 experiments, however, I'm going to assign a partner to you. The reason why is that you and your partner are going to be handing in one report for the 2 of you, and then you both get the same grade. So given that you're going to be getting the same grade as another person, it's important that you're happy working with that person. So for the first 2 experiments, I assign a partner to you, which gives you a chance to work with different people and a little more time to get to know people in your class. And then after that, you can choose any partner you like. The late arrival policy is that if you're more than about 5 or 10 minutes late, or it seems like you didn't watch the introductory video, then you'll be required to work alone that week. But that's the only penalty, so if you show up late or unprepared, you will not be allowed to join your partner that week. Scrolling down again, the Misc Lab policy is quite a bit more strict than the late arrival policy, however, so I want to stress this a little bit. The labs are considered part of the course requirements, and you must do them all to pass the course. I just want everybody to be really clear on that. If you ditch a lab, you fail the whole course. Which means if you miss a lab for a valid reason, like you were sick, you will need to do a makeup lab. So if that happens, get in touch with me as soon as you can to let me know what happened, preferably before the lab even starts. And the default is that you would need to bring me a doctor's note, but generally speaking, if it's the first time you've missed a lab, then I won't require that. But that's something I'll tell you. So if you wake up one morning and you're too sick to come to school, email me to tell me that you're not going to make it, and I will email back to say whether or not I want you to get me a doctor's note. Similarly, if you know in advance that there's a lab period you can't come to, say for example you've got a family function you need to go to, come and talk to me about that and we'll sort something out. Next, we'll discuss how to record data in your lab notebook. This information should start on page 22 of your lab manual. If you don't find it there, then look in the index for section 9, Elements of a Report. Now, this page is a little confusing because different lab instructors want different things from their students. What I'm going to want is the last two columns of this box on page 22. So you'll be turning in both a notebook and a typed report, but just one per pair of students. Scrolling down, before I discuss the individual elements of your report, I'm going to talk a little bit about permanence. Because as a scientist, your lab notebook is a legal document. You can submit it in a court of law. But there's a couple things you need to do, and they have to do with it being a permanent record of all the work that you did in the lab. To begin with, you should never obliterate any information from your lab book. So that means you should write in ink so that nothing can be erased, and you should never tear out a page. If you decide that you've messed up a page, just exit out, turn to the next page, and continue writing. Likewise, you should never use whiteout, and you should never scribble something out to the point where it can't be read. So when you do need to make a correction, cross out the mistake with a single line, and then write the correction nearby. The idea here is that both the mistake and the correction are both readable, so you have not obliterated any information from your lab book. You've still got a record of everything, including the mistake. It's also a good idea when you're changing data to make a small note about why you changed it. You don't need to do that if you're correcting a label, but if you change data, make a little note about why you changed it. And finally, with regard to making your lab book a permanent record of everything you did, don't write things on scrap pieces of paper with the intention of then copying it into your book neatly. Write in the book directly, even if it's rough work. You can put it on the back of a page and then recopy things neatly if you want to, but all your work should go directly in the book. So no scrap pieces of paper, put it directly in the book first, and then recopy it if you want to. And just so you know, messy is fine for your lab book. It's okay if you've got things crossed out, whole pages X'd out, arrows and comments in the corners. It's all good as long as it's well labeled and complete. It's the science that counts, not the neatness. And now if you go to page 23 or section 9.2 of your lab manual, we'll talk about the individual elements that go in your lab notebook. Pre-lab material refers to work that you would do before you come to the lab. I'll tell you in the second lab period what I think you should do to prepare for the experiments each week, so don't worry about this right now. To begin writing your lab notebook, start at the top of a fresh page and begin by writing the identifying information. This would be the title of the experiment, your name and your partner's name, and the date. The next thing that you record is the objective for the experiment. Now, a lot of the experiments in the lab manual have an objective written in them, and I'm fine with you just copying that into your lab report. However, some experiments don't have an objective, in which case you would need to read through the experiment and then try and summarize what you're trying to accomplish in that experiment in a few sentences. For example, the acceleration on an incline experiment does not have an objective in the lab manual. So an objective that you might consider writing would be, we're going to measure the acceleration of a glider on an inclined air track in 3 different ways and then compare the values to each other. And that's all you need, just a few sentences saying what you're trying to accomplish. Now, the next section listed in the manual is the theory section, but this is actually something we're only going to be putting in our typed reports, not in our notebooks, so skip over this section. This will not go in your lab notebook. The next thing that will go in your lab notebook is the Apparatus procedure section. All you need to do here is to refer to the experimental write-up in the lab manual. So you can use the wording in the example here. You can just say, please refer to page whatever of the Physics 1101-1120 laboratory manual. Now, if you're using a different piece of equipment than what's listed in the lab manual, then you should also make note of that in the Apparatus procedure also, as they've done in the example. However, for most weeks, all you need is that first sentence. Please see page whatever of the Physics 1101-1120 lab manual. The next section you add is the data section. So let's scroll down and see how you write a single measurement. When you write a single item of data, you should always write down the variable name, its symbol, the measurement itself, its uncertainty, and the unit. And then close by, you should put an explanation for why you chose the uncertainty that you did. So just explain all the different components that went into your total uncertainty. Constants get recorded the same way, except without the uncertainty information. If you need to take repeated or related data, then it's best to put your data in a table. So flip to the next page to see an example of that. Here's an example of a table. Note that in the column headings, they have all the same information that we had for a single piece of data. They've got the variable name, the symbol, the uncertainty, and the units. And then close to the table, they again explain all of the uncertainty choices that were listed in the table. So it's all the same information you had before, except in a table format. One thing I'll add to this is that it's totally acceptable to have a percent uncertainty in your table. So for example, in the acceleration on an incline experiment, one of the uncertainties on your time is 1%. So it would be fine to put 1% in your column heading. The next report element that the manual lists is the calculations section. However, in this course, you'll be learning how to use Excel to do all your calculations, which would mean you'd type in your formulas, have the program calculate your final answers, and then you'd hand in your spreadsheet as part of your report, and that's what I would mark. So if you want to work something out by hand, do put in a calculation section in your lab notebook. However, I don't mark that. So as far as I'm concerned, your calculation section is always optional. I'll be marking your Excel calculations. The next thing the manual lists is the results section, but this is another thing that is only going to go in your typed report, not in your lab notebook, so skip over this. Likewise, the discussion section will only be going in your typed report, so skip over this for now. You will learn about how to do this in your second lab period. On page 27 of your lab manual, there's an example notebook. So your lab notebook is going to basically look like this with one exception, and that is that I don't require you to put a theory section in your lab report. So you'll have all of these elements except the stuff in the red box. So to recap, you start with the identifying information, the experiment title, the date, your name, and your partner's name. Next, you put in the objective. This would be a few sentences saying what you're trying to accomplish in that week's experiment. If the lab manual has an objective, you're welcome to copy it in. The next section you include is the apparatus procedure section. Usually all you need to do is refer to the lab manual. For example, you can say, please see page, whatever, and then give the full title of the lab manual. Finally, you include all of your data, including explanations for why you chose all of the uncertainties that you did. That concludes this video on general information about the labs and on how to fill in a lab notebook. Please contact me if you have any questions.